Hello, and welcome to our Metacognition and Self-Regulation webinar. And this is from St Matthew's School Research. And it's being led by myself, Tracey Adams, and Hydeh Fayaz. So we're just going to introduce ourselves. So as I said, I'm Tracey Adams and I'm the deputy head here, and I'm also the assistant director of the research school. At present, I'm a year one teacher teaching remotely, and it's very interesting. And I'm also the maths, PHSE and music lead. My specialism is actually maths, and I'm an SLE, and I'm also a maths specialist teacher. And at St Matthews, we love reading, so we wanted to just share what we're looking at the moment. And I'm reading this book, I Am the Seed That Grew, the Tree. And the reason why I love it is it's a collection of poems, and there's one for every day that reflects the seasons.
Hi, I'm Hydeh. I'm a Year 5 teacher here at St Matthews. I am a lead practitioner and I am an ELE for the research school. I'm currently RSC and geography lead. My previous role was an English lead and assistant head, and I'm currently working with the EEF in the primary review group for literacy. So we're reviewing the literacy document. I am currently reading two books. I've got two books on the go. The first book I'm reading is a children's encyclopedia, which I am really enjoying and learning lots from. And the second book I'm reading is a book just recently published by Sarah Davies, and it's a book called Talking About RSE. St Matthews actually features as a case study in there. So if you're interested in RSE, you give that a read.
I'm going to share with you then the aims of this webinar, and it's to look at the EEF mission. We're going to be exploring the concept of learning behaviours, and then we're going to look at how metacognition and self-regulation sit within this model. We're going to introduce the guidance report, and we're only going to have the time to explore two. But one of the things that we wanted to do is just make a link to our current circumstances. We're all doing remote teaching at the moment, and how does metacognition and self-regulation actually support remote learning? And then we want to just introduce you to the modular training. So we're just going to just set a bit of the background in terms of our school context. So St Matthews, we're an inner city school, and we have 210 pupils. And actually our school sits in the fifth most deprived quartile within the UK. So we have 68% pupil premium, and there's so many, just lots of wide ranging factors that impact on this community, like income deprivation, crime in terms of the housing. But one of the things that make St Matthews and Neutral a special place to work is that really we don't see ourselves in terms of a deficit model. And we constantly focus on the things that we can achieve and what can we do to really make the very best of this opportunity of coming to school for our children. So at St Matthews, we've been able to have some achievements like becoming a research school. That's been massive for us. We always put research at the forefront of what we did, but being a part of the research school has really been able to embed that. We're also a talk for writing school. We actually train and work with alongside NatTray. We're a teaching school, and 2015, it's a good while ago, we were Ofsted Outstanding. But it's just about the fact that really we just see ourselves, even though we're in this area, we know that we've got to really work to get the very best for our children. So what is the EEF mission? It's a big focus on closing that the gap that can sometimes arise when children are have educationally and with their income. So it's about trying to really close, that's what they're dedicated on, the link between family income and educational achievement. They want to close that gap. So we exist as a foundation to actually achieve that. And the key aims are, we want to raise attainment for 3 to 18-year-olds, particularly those facing disadvantage. We want to help children to develop essential life skills, and then we want to prepare children for the world of work and further study. And that's the big thing. If children want to move on and study, we want to, through the EEF, prepare them for that. And how does it work? The EEF feel like they have a moral imperative to support teachers and senior leaders to raise attainment and close the disadvantage gap. And we feel that that is rooted within the best available evidence in terms of teaching and learning. So that's our biggest focus. One of the things about the gap is that if there is a gap, and if you look at early years, it's 4.3 months, consistently, if that gap is not closed, it's widened as they go through Key Stage 1 into Key Stage 2, and look at the gap if they continue to be disadvantaged in secondary, 19.3 months. This gap can occur and exists in all types of schools, not just the ones that are classed as underperforming. So actually in outstanding schools, and just in any school, you can have a disadvantage gap. And the biggest thing is that it's about focusing then in on the research and how can we improve the teaching and learning in the classroom. That's what makes the difference to the gap. And as I've already said, one of the biggest things that makes the difference is the quality of the teaching and learning. So why do we do what we do? It's because we want children who are eligible for free school meals to make sure that they leave school with a quality, high standard in terms of their English and their maths, because this is what's going to make a difference to their future performance. And again, at the moment, we're experiencing closures of schools. We're not closed, but you know, that's what everybody keeps on saying in the media, but we're not actually closed, but we're actually moved to remote learning. And one of the things that's come up from the recent data is that it's projected that likely there's going to be a reverse in all the work that we've been doing in terms of narrowing the gap. And they're saying that it could be all the work that we've done in the last decade, we could reverse it. And one of the key things about the EEF is that if you engage with the research, there's a chance to pull this back. And actually the schools that are engaging, we are bucking the trend in terms of seeing that our children are actually come back and actually they're doing really well, because we're really focusing on the research and then improving the quality of teaching and learning. So actually engaging with the EEF can really buck this trend. So how do we do what we do? Well, the first thing we do is that we summarize the best available evidence, and we created our toolkits that really help teachers and leaders to be able to see what are the best bets. We also work on generating new evidence. So we look at what works within improving teaching and learning, and we then develop promising projects, and we set out and talk about what progress can be made within those projects. And then finally, this is our key element. This is where research schools come into play. It's about mobilisation. We support teachers and senior leaders across the country to use evidence to achieve the maximum possible benefit for young people. So we work in partnership with other network schools across the country to deliver the very best training we can around the very best evidence.
So the role of the research school is then to act as a bridge between what the experts are saying and what we know has an impact in the classroom. So we support the practitioners that go back into the classroom to become the experts across their trusts, across their mats. And as Tracey said, we provide the training for the senior leaders, the trusts, to enable that to happen in the classroom. We evidence mobilisation, and we exemplify evidence by working school to school and working together to support school and support the learning that happens in the classroom. Here are our aims, so I'll just let you read those. So what do we mean by evidence? The Teaching and Learning Toolkit is a summary of international evidence that's been collected, and this evidence is collected through robust methods and measurable outcomes. So it's not just qualitative data that's collected, it's actually data that has shown that in the classroom, pupils' outcomes have improved. They're not just from a small sample. It's not talking about something or a pedagogy that has worked for 10 children in a classroom. It's talking about a pedagogy or research that has worked for 10,000 children. So the sample sizes are large and they're representative. Where available too, there are meta-analysis carried out or literature reviews. So it's been, the teaching and learning toolkit has been reviewed, peer reviewed, it's been judged. And the EEF is really clear that if something isn't robust, and if the data is not robust, they will tell us as a research school to let you know. So they'll say that they've done the analysis, but for us as our sample size, it wasn't as robust, so that you just approach it with a little more caution. The evidence then is collated into guidance reports, which underpin the above, and it's an expert panel that comes together to create those guidance documents. So to summarise, we're here to help make teachers make the best decisions in the classroom. So the evidence is provided by the experts, plus our professional expertise as teachers equals evidence-informed practice. So why should we use evidence? I'll just give you 30 seconds to read the debates that are taking place on the screen. So we're all very aware of polarised debates that take place around education. And the EEF are here to knock against that noise that is created through these polarised debates. And especially lately, it seems that everybody is an expert on teaching and what it should look like and what should be happening in the classroom or in the Google Classroom on remote learning. Even those that haven't been in the classroom for 10 years, 20 years. So the EEF are here to recognise that, yes, there is a lot of noise that is happening around our sector, but it's our job then as research schools to kind of synthesise that, pull it together, and then, as Tracey said, we mobilise it through the guidance documents and working with schools to support you doing what you really can do. Here is a message from our new CEO, so I'll just give you a moment to read it. And I think the key message here is that we are in an uncertain time, and we do realise that this pandemic doesn't seem to be going anywhere quick. So we've made, as schools, we've made changes that are deep-rooted in evidence, and we can sustain these changes in our communities and through our school. So we are determined to make the best for our children, and the fact that you're attending the CPD on metacognition and self-regulation means so much, because it shows that you're willing to take that journey too. So I'm just going to talk about a document called Putting Evidence to Work, a School's Guide to Implementation. This document really, this guidance document really underpins everything we do and all of the training that you're going to be receiving this evening, but also the modules that we will carry out on metacognition and self-regulation. Here, the implementation process begins with explore, and it's this process which is going to underpin our training. So if we are exploring the priorities needed in our school, then it's much more likely that we prepare, deliver and sustain changes that are going to have an impact on our pupils. I'm sure we're all aware of changes that have been made in the past, historic changes that we were involved with and then they're no longer around in our schools. So we've just got to make sure that whatever we are choosing to implement is chosen because it is a priority for our children, because then it is more likely to be sustained. And we've also got to make sure that in the explore phase that the staff are willing and ready to take on board this new change or this developed change. Teachers need to understand where we're coming from. So if we've identified a key priority by looking at our data, by hearing our children read, if that's a key priority for us, then our teachers need to be with us on that journey too. their well-being needs to be at the right place as well. So it's a lot to think about when we're implementing something, but this guidance document really helps us as senior leaders to make the changes and sustain them. In the guidance document too, there is also, when we're exploring, there is also a step-by-step guide with how to explore and how to identify a priority, which is really helpful. And if you were to join us on the module training of metacognition and self-regulation, sorry, the explore phase is actually something we would work with you to complete and to have a look at, so we could help identify the priorities for you in your school. And this is another really, really helpful document if we are making changes in our school. Good steps to go through if you're thinking about, well, what's my problem? How can I identify my priority? So that's a really helpful document, and that's all in the Putting Evidence to Work guide.
Okay, so we're going to have a look at exploring essential evidence. And really that just means that when we are looking at evidence, we actually explore a wider picture of evidence, and we make sure that we can draw upon a rich evidence picture, and then we can pull out some handy approaches to appraising research evidence, because we can get evidence from lots of different places, but we need to be really careful and aware about how many people were a part of that study, and how then can we apply it to our context. So as you can see, there's a range of evidence types, and I'll just let you have a read of this grid. And then it talks about how effective these approaches are, and then how much evidence, how successful we can be at using these types of evidence. Our lights have just gone off. I'm just going to move quickly, get them back on. Sorry about that. Thank you, Miss. Again, when we're looking at evidence, we need to be really scrutinise it and actually look for red flags. So in terms of the author and the publication, have they got a specific bias towards the data that the research that they're producing? And actually then do we have to take some of that into account when we're thinking about applying that to our school? So again, as part of the modular training, we would actually look at how do you read research, and how do you make sure that you can get the best out of the evidence that you're looking at. And then this research that we have, we then apply it to the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. And this is the place where some of our meta-analysis of education research has then been gathered together, and it's divided into 35 strands or aspects that cover all areas of teaching and learning. And each of those strands combines systematic reviews on specific themes, and then give you some information. So then you as a teacher or a senior leader can access these toolkits and get some really useful information. One, you can get, in terms of this specific research and this strategy, what is the cost? What would be the cost to my school? Then you can find out on the padlocks. You can find out then the security of this evidence. How confident, if I am to apply this to my school, how confident are we in terms of the evidence? And then the final one in the circle with the number, that gives us then how many months progress you can make if you apply this strategy or this tool to your school. So for instance, on the screen, you can see behaviour interventions, and you can see that actually it's quite secure in terms of, it's kind of medium cost, but it's very secure in terms of the evidence, and then you could get 3 months progress. So it's a really useful, a quick thing that you can look at, but what's really nice is that you can click on each one and it can give you some detailed information about that specific piece of research.
So just following on from what Tracey has just shown, the University of Durham collated all of the teaching and learning toolkit and created this graph which shows practitioners really clearly the cost per pupil and then the effect size of the months gain that the children will have. And clearly, the impactful approaches such as feedback, metacognition, homework, etc., they can be enacted through the lens of teaching. So those are toolkits that can be taken into the classroom and have the most months gain in terms of our pupils. So as you can see here, what we're focusing on today is metacognition and self-regulation, and at £0 cost per pupil, it can have 7 months progress.
So we're now just going to have a look at some of the why we use evidence in terms of learning behaviours, and metacognition and self-regulation sit within that. So again, as Hydeh said, there's lots of polarised debates going on, and I'm just going to give you about a minute to just read what's on the screen. And as you can see, there's so many different debates in terms of the word behaviour. And very quickly, we can assume that this relates to almost mismanaging behaviour and negative connotation. But actually, and some of these debates, when they're going on, they can just distract. They can be very much a distractor and take our eyes away as leaders off and what's really happening in our school. But the research actually is really robust, really strong around behavioural habits and routines being key. And actually the way to improve learning behaviour, not just behaviour, is actually about developing relationships and improving teaching and learning. They are the two key things that make a difference. So what are learning behaviours? Just going to go through a few key things and just make that link to metacognition. So actually behaviour, when we're talking about learning behaviour, it's everything that's necessary for a child to sit in a classroom and be effective with their learning and really be able to focus on what they've got to learn. And that involves the whole child. It's them emotionally, it's them socially, and it's cognitively. And actually, if we think about ourselves as a school community, we are all involved in some way in that child's learning behaviour. So if we look at the next slide, that's why metacognition now sits within this idea of learning behaviours, because actually it's about looking at children holistically. So it's not just their behaviour, it's how they think about learning and how they learn, how they work independently. It's also about how to engage parents. I don't know about you, but at the moment with remote learning, actually parents are the key. And the more that we can get them engaged and into a routine with their children and just support them with the whole day, with how to actually function for the whole day and get the best out of the day. That's what's making the difference to children's remote learning. But also then we have to be aware if they've got any issues in terms of their social and emotional learning, and then in terms of SEND. So in terms of the EEF, the research was so clear that actually we needed to bring these 5 areas together, these 5 guidance reports together to make a difference to children's learning behaviour. So we're going to focus in now on metacognition and self-regulation.
So before we unpick metacognition and self-regulated learning, just thought we'd highlight some documents for you to have a look at. First is the Metacognition and Self-Regulated Learning Guidance Report. Particularly pages 8 and 9, they'll help break down what it is. Also, in the Remote Learning Rapid Evidence Review, the EEF have come up with the 5 steps to a lesson that can happen remotely. So activate, explain, practice, reflect, and review. And this takes into account a child's metacognition and how they self-regulate themselves when learning. So into the definitions, the Education Endowment Foundation they defined self-regulated learning as almost an umbrella, and under that umbrella sits cognition. So that's the process, the mental process of knowing, understanding, and learning more. So that's children knowing the process of understanding. Metacognition, so children being aware of the way that they're learning and how to direct their learning. And then motivation, so the children's want or need to make sure that they stick at a task. So when we talk about cognitive strategies, we're thinking about mnemonics for spelling or methods for division. That's an example of a cognitive strategy. When we think about metacognition, that's the child monitoring and controlling their thoughts. So if we take a maths example, yes, I've got my answer to this multiplication, but did I achieve it in the most efficient way? Why did my partner get it 2 minutes quicker than I did? And then the motivation is the child's willingness to engage with the cognitive and with the metacognitive strategies to be a self-regulated learner. So it's kind of cognition, metacognition, and motivation sits under this umbrella of a self-regulated learner. And what Tracey was saying about the pentagon of learning behaviours really came under the motivation definition for self-regulated learning. We're just also going to share with you another definition of metacognition and self-regulation, and it's no different. It's just more that Dr. James Mannion and Kate McAllister have recently published a book called Fear is the Mind Killer, and in that book they talk about how metacognition, so being aware of the processes of learning, has to be a mirror image to self-regulation. And this just mirrors what Tracey said, in that you can't be a metacognitive learner if you're not able to sit in the classroom and if you're not able to apply your resilience to your learning. So instead of having self-regulation as the umbrella term, actually metacognition and self-regulation need to sit hand in hand. And as teachers, we need to model the monitoring and controlling, not just of metacognition, but of all of those things Tracey was talking about. So engaging parents, the learning behaviours, we need to make sure that we're modelling those. So I suppose that the slight difference between the EES definition and Dr. James Mannion's definition is that feelings and behaviours are much stronger than motivation. You've got to have a lot more about you in order to control and monitor your feelings and behaviours. It's not just about wanting to do something. It's much more than that. It's your environment. It's how you've come into school that day. And I think that's what the EEF are explaining with the Pentagon now. So spotting one of these learners, Barry Zimmerman, who is an educational psychologist, has published something in 2002, published an article, a research paper, sorry, and this is what he says a self-regulated learner looks like. So we'll just give you a moment to read it. So we've just got two questions really, and you can pause the video and reflect on these. But the first question is, when do we provide our students opportunity to understand their targets or set targets themselves? From the definition of a self-regulated learner, it's so crucial that the children are aware of what they've got to improve on, where they're doing well, where they need some peer support or some teacher support. And number two, do we ensure failure is framed as invaluable feedback? So do we foster that culture in our classroom? So you can pause the video and have a reflection.
So we're now going to just kind of dive into the guidance report, and it has 7 recommendations. And we're just going to put those up on the slide, up onto the screen, and you can have a read of those as they come up. So these are the 7 recommendations. And as this is just an hour webinar, we're only going to have a chance to kind of look at 2. And our goal today is also to make a link to remote learning at the same time. So we're going to have a look at two, explore two of them, and then make a link to remote learning. And here are the five recommendations, for remote learning. And I'm just going to read them. It's about, in terms of the recommendations, it's about teacher quality is more important than the actual lessons that you're delivering. It's about access to technology. I'm sure we're all experiencing issues with that, trying to get laptops from the government, and also even within school, trying to source technology for our children. But actually that's the key, particularly for disadvantaged children. It's about peer interactions, how that can provide motivation and improve learning outcomes. How can we support children to work independently? That's a direct link to self-regulation, and how that can improve learning outcomes. And then the different approaches we can take, actually really thinking about the approaches. For myself, even thinking about year one at the moment, we're doing live lessons, but we're also doing pre-recorded. And I found that my children, the biggest take up I get is when I'm live. So for year one, within Key Stage 1, I've checked with the other teachers, and theirs is very different. So you do really have to think about your pupils and what content and how are they accessing that. So we're going to be thinking about at least 3 of these, and how do they link to metacognition and self-regulation.
Okay, so the first recommendation we're going to go through is recommendation 1. And it's no surprise that if we are to foster metacognitive learners and self-regulated learners, then we should have the subject knowledge to be able to do that. So why do we need to do this? It's part of our professional development in the teacher standards that professional development should be underpinned by robust evidence and expertise, and that in best practice, school leaders draw on expert input to ensure that activities are clear about how and why practices work in different contexts. So we're not falling into any traps. We are using the evidence to inform our practice and to make a change to our pupils' outcomes. There is a misconception about metacognition, and that misconception is that it's only developed in older pupils. So I'll just let you read the misconception on the screen. Now, if you're an early years practitioner, I'm sure that you are agreeing with the misconception because it forms the bread and butter of your practice. So, as Shirley Clark also commented, that metacognitive strategies work best when linked with learning context rather than separated. So a lesson on what resilience means is not as effective as discussing resilience in the context of a challenging task, for instance. So the misconception about teaching those learning behaviours in isolation is also something that is carried through. We all remember the brain gyms and trying to work on our resilience muscles, but actually the evidence shows that those things need to come along with the cognitive challenge of a task that is set by the teacher. So in the guidance document, under recommendation 1, this is the format that the EEF have used, and it's a cycle, as you can see. So if you are going to be a metacognitive learner, you have to be able to plan, monitor, and evaluate. You have to, as teachers, we have to acquire this knowledge to know that when a child is planning, they're going to have to activate their knowledge. And we often do that by activating their prior knowledge, by making a link to what they've previously learned to help build their schema. But as they are completing that task, they've got to be able to monitor it themselves, self-monitor, so have knowledge of themselves, have knowledge of the task, so that they can be successful, or so that they can struggle and then at least be able to evaluate what went wrong, what they need to do to improve. And that this cycle is the idea of a metacognitive learner. You'll see here in the all throughout the stages, actually, the learning behaviours come into play. The EEF have published a really helpful guide for us as practitioners to understand what it looks like when the children are planning, when they're monitoring, and when they're evaluating. This is great for us to help model that, to show children that yes, you've got knowledge of the task, that you have knowledge of the strategies, and you have knowledge of yourself when you're completing this task. So this is a really helpful document. So just going to explain how this could look in the context of a Year 5 classroom. This is a history lesson. What does this actually look like for the pupil sitting at the table trying to complete the task? So the task that was given to them was in the centre, compare the reliability of source A and source B when describing the Anglo-Saxon arrival. So source A was written, just to give you a bit of context, source A was written by a monk who was present at the time of the Anglo-Saxon arrival. He was alive. And source B was written by a monk 300 years later, so in around 800 AD. So that's the task that the children were given. They had to compare the reliability of the sources. Before the lesson, we had unpicked the word reliability. We used it as part of our toolkit. As a historian, I need to know what reliability is. We did some active practice of the word reliability. So the cognitive load on that question wasn't there because the children understood what reliability was. So actually, when it came to the task, their focus was on the planning, monitoring, and evaluation of completing that successfully. So if I were a child and I were planning that task, I would need to think about who has written the source and activate my prior knowledge of those people. So the children were tasked with writing and understanding the motive of the 2 monks that were writing about the Anglo-Saxon arrival. Once they did that, once I do that, I will have more idea about the motive of the writers, of the author. And it goes back to what Tracey was saying about the evidence and is the author reliable? So this is a skill that historians have, and this was a skill that we were trying to practice. So I wanted my children to think those things when they came to plan their answer. Once we had activated any knowledge, any prior knowledge needed, so awareness of the monks, who they were, what religion they were they Anglo-Saxon descent or were they British descent, we'd activated that cognition and the children were in the process of monitoring. So has activating that knowledge made the task clearer for me? Can I now begin to compare the reliability? And am I sure of what reliability is when I'm looking at sources? This is what I would have been expecting the children to be thinking whilst they were trying to plan out and answer the question. If a child that I know is going to struggle in terms of their background knowledge on the monks because they were in the lesson, they were present, but the practice that they did didn't show that they understood, then that's an opportunity for that child to be aware of their lack of knowledge and then come together as a guided group, for example. Monitoring as the task is happening is really important because that's knowledge of the task and knowledge of whether I'm going to be successful in this or not. Then, towards all the way through the process of this task, for example, the children were evaluating. So the thing that I wanted them to think about was were the authors reliable because of the background knowledge I already have on them? So the children needed to think about that when they were evaluating. Did knowing more about Gildas the monk make me more successful in this task? And also evaluating, is there anything I've missed? So getting the children to go back and to really unpick their learning. And we are really happy for them to go back to use their books as revision guides and go back to the learning that happened so that they are constantly retrieving that practice and that knowledge. So when the children complete this cycle, it just continues because this could be one paragraph, for example, of the essay they were writing, but this is the process that a self-regulated learner will go through.
Okay, we're now going to explore a misconception 2, I'm just going to read it to you. It's the fact that metacognition is a general skill that can be separated from the subject knowledge. And actually, that is difficult because without cognition, which is a knowledge, there is no metacognition. So it's best to really link the task to the goal and make sure that is clear. So metacognitive strategies can only be improved through practice, and it's best to apply those to specific tasks within subject areas. So let's just have a little look at this and how we can link it to remote learning. So we're going to look at recommendation 4 and how it links here. So if we're really clear about the metacognitive strategies that we need and that cycle that we've just been through, then we can support our children to be independent, even when they're working remotely. And some of the strategies that we can use to support our children to be metacognitive thinkers is actually getting them to reflect and also getting them to know what to do when they are stuck. So one of the things that we do here is we do introductory videos, and we do introductory videos. We actually do pre-recorded lessons where we model something and we talk about, and we actually really go through as a learner ourselves, as a metacognitive learner ourselves. We really model what's happening in our heads, what we're doing when we get stuck. And our hope is that the children are then able to use those videos to then reflect on their learning and to know what to do when they are stuck. And it has, and the report from the EEF has proved that this is a really strong benefit to disadvantaged students. So there we are, making the link between metacognition and self-regulation and linking that to remote learning. Also, one of the things is, again, we need to make our children self-regulated, independent. So we've been actually, each day we upload a very clear structure to the day. One of the things that we want our children to do is at between 9 and 9:30, they've got to register. So now our children are up and alert and beginning the morning just like they would on a school day. And they've got to register, they've got to let us know that they're there. And we're setting morning tasks, we're setting mini morning challenges that they've got to get into. When we have a break, we also say to the children, move away from the screen, go and have a bit of exercise, walk around your house 3 times, or do some sit-ups or star jumps, isn't it, Miss Fayaz? Yeah. Do some star jumps. And then we've also built in time for them where they've got work and activities where they actually move away from the computer, and actually we set a challenge that they've got to then focus on and regulate themselves and work independently, and then maybe upload a video or a picture linked to that work. So actually setting the timetable, being really clear about the structure of the learning, not only helps the pupils, but we found that this is invaluable to parents, that there's a really clear structure to the day, and that helps the children to be self-regulated and self-motivated. And then we've just talked about there, making sure that the children are really clear then about the knowledge of the task, the strategies and themselves. So we know our children really well, and I'm sure you know your children really well in your school, and we know those children who are going to need that extra bit of talking, that extra bit of support to really focus on themselves and keeping themselves regulated. Even today I've had a lovely girl called Hydeh, and she's been telling everybody else how lovely their work is and not getting any work done herself. So I had to say to Hydeh, thank you for those lovely comments, but come on, you've got to regulate yourself and you've got to get focused. So it's about knowing our children, and even online, knowing how we can interact with them to get them focused. And then she messaged me back and said, I'm doing it now, miss. And I put a big smiley face there. So it's all of those things coming together to make remote learning really successful. But my gosh, there is such a place for metacognition and self-regulation within what we're doing remotely. So I'm now going to explore another recommendation from the guidance report. And this one is about explicitly teaching pupils metacognitive strategies. And we've already talked about including how to plan, how to monitor and evaluate work. And what I'm going to do is going to share some examples from in school, and then I'm going to share how this links to remote learning as well. So how do we teach metacognitive strategies? One of the biggest things is explicit instruction. And that's where you as a teacher orchestrate certain set of events that's going to happen within the learning that's going to help the children to improve. And actually, we need to teach our children 3 key strategies. We need to teach them how to plan, how to monitor their work, and then also how to evaluate. And these skills, the evidence has suggested that it's best to teach them subject specifically. So when you're thinking within maths, how do you teach a child to plan if they're doing problem solving? How will they monitor the stages as they go through? And then once they've completed the problem, then how will they evaluate how they've done? How do they know that they've been successful? Or how do they know which part within the problem where they might have broken down, and then they might have broken down their strategies and they need to go back? So what's really supportive from the guidance document is that they give you actually a 7-step model to teaching metacognitive strategies explicitly. So we have activating prior knowledge, being really explicit with our strategy instruction, modeling that, and getting children to memorize and remember that strategy as they apply it, as we guide them through some practice. Then once we see that they're strong, we can release them to independence and then get them to reflect. And if you look at the chart on the side, it shows that actually in the beginning, it's very much teacher-led, but as we move through the process, we're releasing it, we're releasing the control over to the children. And I just wanted to show you some examples from year 5 of children actually planning their own work using different tools to really plan effectively, different graphic organizers. And we've got cause and effect here, and then we've got a concept map, but the children are able to clearly plan out what they're thinking onto paper. And then here's another one. This is from RE. So looking at how Christianity has entered into Britain, and then really clearly how they've set out their work in an organizer. And then I wanted to just introduce you to the 7-step model, but through an EYFS example. So this was an RE lesson, and the teacher wanted to explore the idea of the children being special. And her 2 key questions were, who is special to me and why are they special? And the teacher was able to activate prior knowledge and really discuss those key words with the children. Then she did some really explicit strategy instruction. So she used a puppet then to talk about how God tells Christians they are special to him. And she did that through some role play. Then the teacher actually wanted the children to be able to write down why they're special using her talk frame. So then she brought the children over to this mirrored area, and then using the puppet again, she started to look in the mirror and talk about the things that made her special. And one of the key things that in terms of modeling is that she was very much modeling the sentence structure that she wanted the children to use through a talk frame. But then she also modeled how to write her ideas down on a post-it note. And that was modeling the use of the phonetic knowledge and also the basic code in terms of how do I translate my talk into writing. So very clearly, there was lots of explicit instruction happening there. She was being really clear about what she wanted to see the children then do. So can you see at the beginning of the stage, it was very much teacher-led, teacher instruction, and being explicit about the strategy and what she wanted to hear them say and then write. Then as we move through the process now, she wanted to use some guided practice, memorization of the strategy. So then she got the children now to take over, to start beginning to take ownership of this. And they were then able to use the talk frame to express why they are special. And then they began to apply that into writing by adding some post-it notes to the RE wall. Then it moved on to independent practice. And what was so lovely is that it wasn't about writing up a big piece of writing into a book, but that independent practice happened at the end of the day when we were closing off the day with our school prayer. So the teacher then used the opportunity to thank God for the things that are special to her. But then she also gave opportunities for the children to become a part involved in that prayer and share why they are special. And that was a chance for her to see who had taken on board her modelling and the explicit instruction that she had done at the beginning. And then the final step of the model then is structured reflection. So that was about then putting this RE lesson into the continuous provision for the next day and getting the children then to continue to explore and to write cards and postcards and letters about what makes them special and who is special to them. So how does this link to remote learning? I think there's a real direct link to recommendation 1, which is the teaching quality. It's actually the quality of that teaching. If we're following that model, it's about the quality that's more important than actually the lesson that we're delivering. We're just going to explore that a little bit. So the remote learning and policy actually talks about we have to have really clear explanations, which is our explicit instruction. We've got to think about how we scaffold what we're teaching in terms of remote learning. And that's about, if you look at the model again, starting off with the teacher, but then moving, letting go, releasing that control, but really being careful about how we scaffold that. And then the really important bit is about that in feedback. How do we structure in some time to reflect on what we've done, with the children reflecting, but also hearing the teacher reflect, because remember, you're the model in the classroom, you're the model for the children. So what are some of the examples from St Matthews? As I said, in terms of our explanations, we've really focused on doing some quality pre-recorded introductions, making it really clear, explicit instruction on what we want the children to learn. We've also been modelling. We do live lessons and we've been using Google Classroom. So we use Google Meet and we are able to model in our lessons. And one of the invaluable things that we've been able to do is actually we all took our visualizers home. I've got a MacBook, so the visualizer doesn't work on the MacBook. So one of the things that I use is actually a tool called IPvo. So it's an online visualizer that you can use, and it's worked perfectly for my lessons. One of the things that we've also done is there are lots of people out there who are saying that they have online materials, but we have been kind of picky and kind of choosy about what we're using, because the explanations, the quality of the explicit instruction is more important than the lesson. It's not just about giving the children lots of things to do online, but if the explanations aren't clear, the quality of the work or the learning won't be any good. So we've really focused on using White Rose Hub videos and Oak National, but the key thing is that we watch everything before we put it out to make sure it links to the way that we want it to be taught and the explanations are clear enough. And for me, in terms of year one of the extra things that I've done is actually I will watch the video and take some snippets out of the video, and I actually then make a little, almost like a little prep sheet for year one, so that they can see the model, they can see maybe my example of what I would do, and just to give them some extra tools to support them so that the explanations are of a really good quality. In terms of scaffolding, and when we're modelling, we're still breaking down the tasks into smaller chunks, into really clear steps, so that the children are really clear about the journey that we're taking them on within those lessons, or those pre-recorded or those live lessons. One of the key things that we're still doing is we're using worked examples, we're modelling through. But one of the key things that they said that works really well for remote learning is something called backwards fading. So it's where you have worked examples, but gradually, we're talking about releasing that control and moving children to independence. It's about having worked examples where there are spaces for the children to complete those. After they've seen you model it through completely, now make some spaces and give them opportunity to be involved in that example. And finally, it's about the feedback. We don't want the marking and the feedback to be onerous. So in terms of Google Classroom, it's really good that you can just give short comments, you can copy and paste comments, but we're trying to get children to upload work and giving some feedback. But one of the things that we're really training our children to do is to give feedback to each other. That is a massive thing that makes a difference in remote learning and shows that children are self-regulated, but also are very clear about thinking. They are thinking about the learning. If they are, I know that sounds strange, but if they're sharing comments, that means they're thinking about the learning, and that shows that they're being metacognitive. So it's a really key thing that we've been really driving forward.
So we're coming towards the end of our webinar now, and we just wanted to flag up these documents again. The importance of effective implementation is what underpins anything that we decide to move forward in our school. And as Dylan Williams said, everything works somewhere, nothing works everywhere. So you really have to understand your context and know your context before anything is implemented. And of course, that happens in the explore stage. So people think success is a straight arrow, when really success is all wibbledy-wobbledy and very, very, very messy. It is, especially remote learning, that pretty much describes the first week. So as long as we have explored and we prepare, then we are able to, in the deliver and sustain stage, take a different route or to come off track, because we've prepared for that, and that is fine. And what that means is that we are preparing for a sustained change, not just a change that's going to happen overnight and then in a few years' time not have the outcome we want for our pupils. So in the implementation, putting evidence to work guidance document, the EEF, they talk about what are the foundations of good implementation, and I will just read these out. So we treat implementation as a process, not an event. Allow enough time, particularly in the preparation stage, and prioritise appropriately. And again, this is something that we would help support with in the modules. Do fewer things better. So stop approaches that aren't working. So we talked earlier about those things that we've been doing for years, but that aren't necessarily having an impact. Well, our teachers need to know that the thing that we are presenting is going to have the impact. So what can we stop doing so that we can put our energy into the thing that's going to drive pupil outcomes? And again, de-implementation. Treat stopping something as seriously as starting, and put as much time and thought into it. Set the stage for implementation through day-to-day routines and practices. And it really is, this is really feels for me, it's more about the culture and the ethos of your school, and ensuring that leaders in your school are involved in that implementation stage, especially the explore, so that they can build the capacity to prepare, to deliver and sustain change in your schools. Really important. So again, just to flag up the Metacognition and Self-Regulated Learning Guidance Report, Tracey and myself have gone through recommendations 1 and 2, but there are 5 others for you to look at through the guidance report and through the module training if you choose to join up. So these are the...
So here are the recommendations. We looked at recommendation 1 and 2, and then the rest of them will just come onto the screen. And then what we'd like to just show you today is that we are really passionate about developing experts in metacognition and self-regulation. So one of the things that we just wanted to flag up today is some recommended reads and listens which you could explore within your school or independently or collaboratively. So one of them is the book that Hydeh talked about, where we got the definition that kind of supports what the EEF already says. And one of the brilliant things that the EEF does is that they do bite-sized evidence, and they deliver weekly email series to you. So if you want to sign up, you can see that metacognition and self-regulation is there. So over 7 weeks, they would deliver a bite-size and breakdown of each recommendation, and that would just wet your whistle, get you started. And finally, one of our recommendations is a podcast, and this is by Alex Quigley, and it's part of the trialed and tested series. So there's lots on there that you might be interested in, but there is one that focuses on this guidance document. So now we just want to introduce you to what could a modular program look like, because as Hydeh said, we were able to cover 2 today, but my gosh, there's so much you can get out of the other 5. So this is what the 9 modules would look like. And built within this program is a chance for the delegates who would attend to do some independent work, but also to come together collaboratively, even though virtually, it might be still virtual at this time, but come together collaboratively. And then we would be able to offer coaching, support, and really be able to help you to really think about metacognition and self-regulation, understand it, really understand it deeply, begin to move it forward in your setting, and then begin to think about how you can implement it wider across your school or across a trust. So there's lots of areas for optional study where you can take these to depth, and we would then be able to offer additional research that you could read around all of the different modules. So we are having a provisional date for summer 1. So just to remind you, this is Hydeh and Tracey from St Matthew's Research School. And we just want to say a big thank you. It takes much at this time when we're going through something like this to say that actually I still want to be a professional. I still want to move my expertise forward so that I can make a difference for the children in my classroom, if you're a teacher or if you're a leader across your school or trust. So we just want to say a big thank you. Here's our details. Do follow us on Twitter. Do email if you have any questions that might have arisen from listening to this webinar. Please do email us and we will definitely get back to you. And hopefully we've got all of your details. So once we've set our dates for the modules, we'll release them, and we really do hope to see some of you join us. So thank you for listening.